experiments when working with the wheat.
What did he learn? Is that what it said? Can you
How
say
did
it
he
again?
handle the actual experiments? So when he was learning all of that science, how did he handle all of that?
How did he do it? So, one of the things Dr. Borlaug became known for was called shuttle breeding. Have you heard about that? So, first thing you have to keep in mind is Borlaug's from Iowa. We don't grow hardly any wheat in Iowa. And on his farm, there was no wheat grown. He only learned about wheat when he went to the University of Minnesota. And his professor, Professor Stakeman, gave a lecture about rust disease affecting wheat. And Borlaug was so intrigued by that, he changed the whole course of his life. And he studied wheat at the University of Minnesota. So when he was in Mexico, Henry Wallace, whose image is in here and a number of places up here behind me, was Secretary of Agriculture and Vice President of the United States, founder of Pioneer Hybrid Seed Company. Henry Wallace visits him there, and he's with Borlaug out in the wheat field, and he says to Borlaug, "What's a good Iowa boy like you doing working in wheat?" He thought, should be corn. That's what, Iowa was known as the corn state in those days. But Borlaug explained to him how he got interested in working in wheat. And he was determined and anxious to be able to produce new varieties of wheat as quickly as possible. But usually there's just one growing season, and it takes a whole season to grow any wheat. So you're talking about 5 or 6 months from preparing the ground, planting, weeding, harvesting. So you plant in the spring, harvest, in the fall, and then you store the wheat for the winter, and then you start over. So in Mexico, he figured out, well, we can cut the time in half if we can grow 2 crops every year. So he would grow a crop in northern Mexico during the normal North American growing season, plant in the spring, harvest in the fall. And when he had done that, he'd pick up and move hundreds of miles south, where in southern Mexico, it would still be warm enough to grow another crop, and he'd plant in the fall and harvest in the spring. So he shuttled back and forth. He moved himself and took his scientist with him, and therefore cut the amount of time in half. So remember, I said that he started working in the mid-1940s. First goes to Mexico in the mid-1940s and develops his miracle wheat with the Norin 10 Japanese dwarf varieties in the late 1950s. And he's only able to do that because he had been doing shuttle breeding. So that's, say, like 15 years. Without shuttle breeding, it would have been another 15 years to get him to the same place. He wouldn't have developed it in 1959, but like in 1974 or 75. And by then, millions, hundreds of millions of people would have starved to death in India and Pakistan, and the tragedy would have taken place. instead of the Triumph. So that shuttle breeding, kind of ingenious approach from that practical farm boy from Howard County, was a stunning development that played a key role in averting famine and large numbers of deaths. On the side of Borlaug's statue in the U.S. Capitol, on one side it says, "The man who saved 1 billion lives." And on the front are his 3 medals. I'm sure Charlotte told you about those. And there are only 3 Americans who have those 3 medals: Nobel Peace Prize, Congressional Gold Medal, Presidential Medal of Freedom. Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., Elie Wiesel, who was a Holocaust survivor, and Norman Borlaug. Only 3 Americans. There are 4 other not Americans, but only 3 Americans have those 3 awards.